And we are live. I am joined by the ever wonderful, astute professor of the DR, Mr. Dave the Distributist. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing fine. I didn't know I was professor, although I guess I do have a PhD, but not in any topic related to what I blog about. So, yes, thanks for having me on.
Oh, it was a pleasure, and I really wanted to have you on to have like a general advice stream for younger DR people. I'm going to use that term so we all stay on the same page.
Yeah,
Um,
that's just I don't know why people have a problem with that word.
hmm,
It's a catch-all for people who are on the right and who are not Republican, Dan Crenshaw people. So, like, just use that word. It's easier.
Everyone who is against the progressive liberal hegemony, probably a better way to say it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was perhaps some other caveats, but that's good enough.
So I'm just curious, Dave. Um, Kind of what kind of woke you up to? You've kind of said this in your past live streams. What kind of woke you up to the fact that liberalism was a lie? Uh, that it only lead down
Uh,
to
well, I mean, this is I come from a progressive area a very progressive area of the country. So this is sort of ground zero of most things having to do with left-wing ideas came from this area of the world. And I'm not going to say that I mean, it's kind of makes a better story if I say I died in the world progressive. And sure, I was kind of, I voted Democrat and I voted for John Kerry and Barack Obama and all that stuff. I'm really dating myself now. And but the thing is that I never really fit in too well with it. I was kind of a gadfly. But I think for the majority of my life, what I try to do is I would try to come up with some sort of moderate version of progressivism that would be my ideology. And this is sort of a process that went on for most of my adult life. And I think the final iteration of that was what we know now as mainstream conservatism. And sort of the story of my channel is going from a more mainstream conservative perspective. I would say perhaps a bigger transformation would be religiously in my own life. But since you asked me the political question, I'll just say, the story of my channel over the last 6 years has kind of been me discarding this hope of conservatism or this false hope. And this is, we could talk about what's wrong with all of these things, but the main issue that's wrong is that they make compromises with a force, really a force of history that is fundamentally deconstructive, corrosive, metastasizing, and hostile to the human spirit. And you have to make a hard break ideologically with this force somewhere. And of course, we all have to live in the modern world. We all have to put food on the table. We all have to work. But you come to realize that if you politically compromise it or ideologically compromise with it, you essentially play into its game and you sort of have this role in its own entertainment product. And because of that, it's important to kind of look to more radical thinkers and thinkers of a different age. And I think that's what we really have been doing on the distant right these days. So I don't know how much that suffices for a story, but that's kind of my general trajectory. I could list any number of things that were kind of moments when I kind of saw through the facade. But it's funny. You could see little things in the 90s, little things in the 2000s that would let you know that, okay, this is not stable. These progressive ideas are corrosive. And then in 2013 just became egregious and it became something that everyone could see. And then very slowly, everyone started saying it, and you're either making peace for it and peace with it, I should say, and basically being assimilated by it, or you're dissenting. And that's where we find ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that after 2014. This is something I personally felt, although I didn't have the words at the time to describe this, like this sense that things fundamentally changed. Because I was born in 2002. Uh, so I've only ever known decline, shall we say. And I felt this fundamental change in society. I don't know the word to describe it exactly, but it felt fundamentally different after 2012. Like the era of normalcy, we'll call it, where we could all get along. Fighting terrorism. The economy is doing great. There's no problems. At home as
Oh
long as
man, you remember that? You remember that? Remember terrorism? You remember being afraid that Islam was going to take over the world? It's silly now, right? When you think back to it.
It is, but it was truly a different time.
Yeah.
You didn't have also like this open politicization. Everything's been political, but it wasn't just this open political attack on half the country. We'll say it wasn't open. It was subtle, but like generally everybody could get along. We're all united as Americans. This idea of patriotism was still very low going in like 2010, 2011. Before that,
well, I mean, I know I know we've had Jay Burden on, and he said this, but you could see the I don't come from Berkeley, but I usually talk about it because I spent a lot of time there, and it's very close to my hometown, and it kind of suffuses the culture of my hometown. But if you went to Berkeley, you could see all the stuff that was post 2013. You could see that all in the 90s. I guess the idea was that it would be contained. You can watch the Bowling for Columbine. There's this ridiculously sort of anti-white cartoon that plays in the middle of it that implies that American crime rates are driven by paranoid paranoid white suburbanites just shooting innocent black people in their spare time. All this stuff was there in the background, but it was restrained somehow before 2012. And now it's unleashed and autonomous, and it doesn't seem to have any opposing force really. And it's going to be interesting once, because once the boomers retire, then it's really going to be interesting because it's hard to see what really stops it, because the generational forces cut against it for now, and they're slowly receding.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that you mentioned. Once all the boomers kind of retire out, they kind of go away. And my grandfather was the stereotypical boomer from the South, grew up in the 50s, was very pro, capitalism and, immigration, because they come here and they work efficiently, and they pave the roads and, mow the grass, which is something like I felt was kind of wrong in a sense because
yeah, I mean, what's the end point of this? Are they going to stay mowing grass for all eternity?
No, we see that what happens with that. We take it to its logical conclusions. So I think since I was young, I kind of like saw this kind of lie fading from me, because probably just because the era I grew up in. I grew up in we'll call it the last gasp of normalcy in America, white Christian America, because it still didn't exist in the South, where I grew up in Florida. So I grew up in like a central kind of Florida suburb, but it was still fairly Christian, fairly traditional values. And it just wasn't this force for catabolic progressivism that we see today. It didn't consume everything at all, and I feel like that's kind of why, even though I'm 20, I can still, I'm not trapped in this like comforting lie like some of the Gen Xers and the early millennials are, because they grew up in some of them grew up in the 90s, the era of prosperity. You could still believe in the lie, and everything seemed normal and fine.
Well, I mean, it's not just that. I mean, the 90s, and this is the thing that was different between the 90s and the 2000s, is that I'm old enough to remember the distinct feeling, and it was very different. In the 2000s, things were normal, but it was almost like the culture was doing a holding pattern. In the 90s, there was a sense of optimism and exploration. Culture was in many ways exploding, and you could go into the movie theater and see like an amazing movie that will blow your mind. You'd have I know you can highly criticize these bands, but bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and the Smashing Pumpkins and Radiohead, I mean, these were very, very novel forces in culture. They didn't feel like they were neo anything. They felt like they were blazing a new path. So everything felt like it was expanding and open, and everything was full of possibilities in the 90s. And that's really what people miss. And in the 2000s, I think there was the shadow of that previous era disappearing, but it was very much just a holding pattern. We're going to keep where we are and not really react to the times that are obviously on the horizon. And now we've kind of dipped our toe into metastasizing decline as it appears. And who knows how far this rabbit hole will go, but there you are.
Yeah, you could really be optimistic. The era of optimism. America was at its height post Cold War. We won. We were the global superpower. Our rival collapsed before us. Our influence was unyielding. Liberal progressivism was this force that was going to dominate. Russia was becoming capitalistic. American culture was everywhere. And let's not forget that, the first Gulf War was also a test of America's just absolute power that we've never seen on the planet. We could absolutely dominate anywhere we go with the best military for any reason whatsoever. And that's not something that exists anymore. That's kind of why people who are some of the older people in my generation who are nostalgic for the post 9/11 kind of feel, because they felt.
Well, I'm like that media post 9/11 feeling.
Yes, because we were all united.
6 months, the 6 months of unity we experienced as a country before, in between the advent of 9/11 and the premiere of Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man movie, there was a feeling of unity in the country. Yeah, but I agree. I can see being nostalgia for that. There was sort of, there was sort of a sense of the early 2000s that I remember, although it's hard to put my finger on exactly. I still remember it as sort of a distinct period. It hadn't yet sort of merged into that whole digital morass that we experienced post something like 2009, post social media, if you will.
Yeah, the birth of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
Yeah.
And this is something I also witnessed growing up in the suburbs, was kind of the death of real life relationships and friendships. That kind of just started to fade away, and we all started to congregate on the iPhone with social media. And I immediately noticed the immediate implications of that were fundamental to the society. Sort of the close suburbs that I kind of used to know were a relic of the past. People, that used to hang out and put on community events, and we used to all look out for each other. As we all became atomized and started to put our lives on social media instead of friendships, I kind of saw the immediate health effects, mental health, before that became a big thing. Because a lot of the people grew up in high school, they all started to have mental disorders and problems, and it became just extremely pronounced, is what I noticed with that change. And I noticed that after the iPhone came about was when I really
that quickly.
Yes, and it was quite obvious to me. I'm not sure why I noticed it in particular, but it just really stuck out in my mind. Was all these young people who were 10, 11, 12, all started to have these mental problems around the same time. Maybe I just mentally put the pieces together that they probably are connected in some way.
No, I mean, we've known for a while that social media has this effect on people. Yeah, it's what I kind of associate this with the depression dopamine cycle. Your mind's just hopped up on dopamine all the time, and the second it has that taken away, it doesn't know what to do, and you go into a depression. And furthermore, you can't cope with it because sort of the more healthier, in the same way that junk food makes you malnourished, social media basically cuts you off from real world relationships and actually cultivated hobbies and cultivated skills, so that you don't really have a substrate to fall back on. It's just whatever individual emotion is being generated in the moment. I mean, it's incredibly unhealthy. The great irony is that in the 90s, I thought this stuff would sort of pave the way for a new world. This is what everyone was dreaming about, the open information superhighway that would break down all barriers and advance human dialogue and, write your own utopian ending to that story. But it apparently doesn't happen that way.
No, and I feel like I was born like just late enough to where I missed out on this era of optimism with tech that still exists in the 90s. It was just kind of the malaise of the 2000s, blissful ignorance, as I'll call it, still grasping on the straws of normalcy in society. But that quickly changed. This kind of advent and reshape in society, especially among young people. There's a reason they call us the iPad generation. And it's very true, although I wasn't thankfully raised entirely on the iPhone. I still had some real life relationships before that. But for many people my age and even younger, all they know is the iPhone from their millennial parents.
That's the thing too. I mean, it seems like the Zoomers don't really go to parties anymore. It's so weird, right?
No, we really don't, though.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. I mean, it's sad because that's such a cornerstone of my own 20s, was meeting people at parties. And there's the horrible sort of college parties where everyone's drunk or smoking pot or whatever. But then there's the actual adult parties where you have hors d'oeuvres and a cocktail and have dinner and meet a bunch of people and hear about their lives that are sometimes interesting, sometimes a little bit boring, but it's a human experience, right? And I don't know. I think that's just, it's sort of, I wouldn't say it's gone, but I feel like you have to actually attempt to recreate it. I guess the only question is, why wouldn't you want to recreate it? If you had a party, would nobody come? Would everyone just be on their phones all the time? I don't know. It's hard to say.
I would say a lot of them would be on their phones, just because they were raised on that. But for the slightly older people and Gen Z, even older than I am, we're kind of nostalgic right now for this era before the iPhone kind of took over social relationships to the extreme. That kind of like human interaction at the higher class party that you kind of mentioned there is something that a lot of us have never experienced. It's only something that our Gen X and millennial parents tell us about, which is kind of sad, but that's a lot where a lot of our stuff comes from.
I don't know. I would, again, this is something that I'm not so sure how. I'm maybe too old to help with this, but I do know some younger people who in contravention of all societal trends throw parties and go out and play sports and meet people. I know it's a lot less than it used to be. And I always hoped that people of more right-wing persuasion would be able to kind of preserve this. I mean, not even really preserve it. That sounds sort of defeatist almost, but that the in real life social engagement would be a specifically right-wing cultural app. Here on the right wing, we actually have parties. Here on the right wing, we put friends ahead of parasocial relations. Here on the right wing, this is about real human relationships, and not about likes or whatever.
Yeah, I think we are starting to kind of wake up to that, with having more kind of basket weaving meetups. I've had one with our good friend Paul in Gettysburg a couple months ago that was really fun.
Oh wait, well you
You
were
were
at
at
that
that
one?
one,
I was at
yes,
one
I
there too.
was.
Yeah, yeah. I got
Yes.
kind of I had my family in tow, and we got separated from the pack like really early because when you're the only person with a kid, you're not taking the same pace on that as people, the 20-year olds, right? So yeah, it was fun. Yeah, I think that it's so bizarre because when you try to download culture from online into real life, you get really spotty results. And I mean, I'm not saying that the basket weaving is one of my big passions. I really hope to see that increase and get large enough so that something is reasonably close and not 4 hours away from me. Because, but this is, you're still getting a very spotty result of something that in a previous era was so easy. I mean, not so easy, but it was just natural. It's just what people did, right?
Yeah, I feel like that's where a lot of the cynicism of my generation comes from. It comes from our Gen Z, oh sorry, Gen X millennial parents telling us that you need to go find yourself, and that if you just try hard enough and look for it, you'll find your true self and your kind of purpose. And a lot of us kind of believed that, and it just wasn't forthcoming. And so fell for whatever social media, Instagram, we're kind of pushing at the moment. And a lot of that was just smoke pot and drink alcohol, pretty much. And
It's exactly what the left wants, right? They want you to be sick. I mean, I don't say that's a little bit pejorative on the left. I mean, I don't think they are thinking that, but it does sort of ideally play into their client demographic. If people are continuously sick and continuously indolent and continuously unable to take care of themselves, then they need managers. They need people to take care of them. And that's sort of the left business model is to sell your independence to us for care and your votes. And that's the generation we've created.
yeah, it's a very kind of zombified generation. I would describe most of the people my age and even younger. Well, I don't even know what Gen Alpha is like, but I imagine it's much worse than even what I was raised with.
Well, I mean, can it really get any worse? I mean, I don't think that these devices have, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think these devices, obviously I'm keeping devices away from my kid, but I feel like the damage they do really occurs. And, I'm not a pediatrician, but my instinct is that the damage that these things do occurs at around 7 or 8 and on, obviously. And so, I don't know if early childhood exposure is really going to make a huge amount of difference, but I could be wrong. Obviously, early childhood exposure means that it's very, very difficult to take that away from somebody.
Yeah, the brain is still plastic. I think still up to you're like 10 or 11. Most of it is still very plasticky because it's still learning things, trying to how to interact with society.
I mean, your brain is plastic throughout your life, but it gets significant. There's a deplasticization, or that's not a good word. There's a solidification that occurs right before your teens, and there's a solidification that happens in your early 20s. And then outside of those times, it's kind of more of a linear trend over time. But neuroplasticity, it's not just something for the left. It's something we can take advantage of. And, this is something that I kind of miss, this whole conversation between Anglo-ortho and people like Jay Burden and Academic Agent and whatnot. But, I'm academic, what I should say, Anglo-ortho had this whole spiel about free will, and he kind of re-embraced a lot of liberal ideas, and he was highly criticized for that by Jay Burden and the likes, and that fair enough, because I don't think he was attacking a steelman position of those ideas. But I was sort of a defender of Anglo-ortho, and it's not like he's gone anywhere. He's still out there making videos. I'm a little bit behind on watching them, but I'm highly sympathetic to this perspective because I'm really angry at this fatalism. People are just, talk about sort of a deterministic phenomenon that we can see sociologically going on broadly, say like the sexual revolution. We could say the sexual revolution happened and we can't de-invent birth control. But then they'll use that sort of broad deterministic trend to basically either urge a counsel of despair, or urge you to take the role of a victim, or to say that we should just go along with it. We should just, fuck it. Let's just continue to pile fuel on the fire. And it'll be worse for the next generation, but at least we got ours. And that's not the proper reaction to these kind of things at all. I think that's kind of disgusting, to be honest. And I see it from a lot of, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions on anybody in particular, but I see this kind of fatalism occurring in people that I know otherwise to be good people. And I find the phenomenon of this fatalism, whether it's indulgent or despairing or just weak, to be kind of an abdication of a responsibility to seek the best in life. And if Anglo-Ortho was just trying to deliver that message, I think it was well received. And I think people need to take that to heart a lot more, because I'm not here to give in to the modern world. If I wanted to give in to the modern world, I would have just smoked pot and stayed a progressive for the rest of my life. And if you want to do that, that's fine. But we have to proceed with the understanding that there is a possibility to push back on these trends, at least as a remnant. And we need to be understanding and we need to be realistic. But I don't know. I really want to separate at this point the individual imperative that are sort of that isn't sort of laid at our feet, and the larger trends that we may or may not be able to stop in their macrocosmic form.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that there. Kind of wanting to just kind of abdicate responsibility. I feel like a lot of this comes from the absence of fathers in a lot of our lives. I felt this especially. My father was gone early with a divorce. And you kind of lose that male discipline in young men's lives that just goes out the window. And so you'd be told, I'll do whatever feels good. Don't do anything dangerous. Don't climb a tree. Don't go explore the woods at night with friends. Stay inside. Kind of be feminine. Also, the school system explicitly teaches that outward masculinity is a problem.
And of course, the whole things like scouting are now frowned upon too, or are kind of captured by the same forces that captured the school system, which is very unfortunate.
It is. It was one of the last organizations for men, young men, that wasn't completely corrupted in a perverted way. But
it does seem like, and this is something that is just it's so hard to piece back together again, because what happens is you want something that is like the Boy Scouts of America after the Boy Scouts of America is shattered, but you can't do that. You can create it online virtually, but then it becomes a giant grift operation, and you get like the Jack Murphys of the world selling you masculinity in a bottle and quick fixes. But really, in order to build back something that was like that can exist in this age, it's got to be small, it's got to be tight, and it has to be fundamentally local. There's no way you're going to be able to find that. I mean, you might become aware of it online, but you can't build it online in any meaningful sense.
No, you kind of miss that real life interaction. That's kind of fundamental for anything to actually be meaningful, that just online cannot provide whatsoever. And I wanted to believe in this because it was just easy, that we could somehow change things by having Discord spaces.
Well, yeah, Discord was a particular. I mean, it was kind of tempting because it was everything that you want was on Discord. It's basically like, build your own space, build your own Facebook, and your own rules apply. But first of all, it's heavily moderated by our enemies. I've gotten banned like 3 times now. And second of all, well, I guess I don't know what would have come of it if I had kept it going on and on and on, and it grew and grew and grew and grew. But with the exception of, a very small handful of people, a lot of people you encounter there, the support is a mile wide and an inch deep. And you need the exact opposite. You need to get a few people who you know very well, and who you respect, and who you're willing to be a little bit loyal to, and then go from there. Because a mile wide and an inch deep is just, then it becomes sort of an entertainment product. The thing you have a deep connection to is the platform itself, and the platform itself is controlled by your enemies.
It's also deeply unhealthy because it isn't real life interactions or relationships. And it kind of reinforces the same problem that Twitter and Instagram and all these other platforms that we've tried to do something similar on, kind of.
Well, I mean, nothing is worse than Twitter. You have people that would be friends in real life finding reasons to hate each other on a daily basis. It's insane. I'm kind of on there, but I don't know what to say about it. I've been on there for like 2 months since Elon's return in a serious way. And I've seen, like no less than 3 or 4 instances where people who were allies in real life, shaking hands with each other and eating dinner, became enemies of each other over like the stupidest shit posts imaginable. And half the time, you're not even so sure if they're ironic or not. It's just people pissing each other off. And you couldn't get a more chaotic social media platform than Twitter. And the same thing for Telegram, too. These are almost useless for purpose. I met a few people who I'm friends with on Twitter that I would basket weave with. And it is sort of a Rolodex, but the culture it encourages is just toxic.
Yeah, it's a cancerous one. It's a cancerous on society as a whole, I think. Because just the way it encourages you, because again, it's designed to encourage the most dopamine as possible by getting the most interactions as quickly as possible. And that involves how can we start something between people we agree with in our not enemies camp, because I want interaction validation over this other person. A lot of it's mental justification for that. A lot of these social factors, these influences of dopamine also play a large role in kind of enforcing that mechanism to the extreme, which is why I think it's so cancerous in particular.
It would seem that sports, I keep on thinking more and more about sports and about how that's a necessary component to real life friendship. Sports have to be physical, and they're adrenaline based, which means that they kind of flush your system of the dopamine responses, and they're healthy, and they actually structure a friend group around an actual masculine pursuit. I don't know if this is sort of a panacea, but it certainly is the right direction, in my opinion.
I think it could definitely be used for positive, much more than social media can be. But I feel like a lot of that gets caught up in the people who just watch sports on TV, sort of meme.
I guess so. I mean, in my experience, sports playing and sports spectator, being a sports spectator and being a sports player is a very different sort of community. To me, they're not very, like, for instance, I played tennis in high school, but I was never a big tennis watcher. I sucked at tennis in high school, but I wasn't like a star player, but I played for like a year and a half, but I never really was into watching it. Right. And the same thing is true. Like I watched college football. I never played football in my entire life, as maybe once in like grade school. So I know, to me, they're a very different phenomenon, I guess. And I always have them separated in my mind.
No, I was just referring to the fact, because for a lot of us, our entire conception of that, because we're not raised to play physical sports anymore in schools, it's just like comes from our dads and other male figures in our lives who just watch the sport, kind of cheer on their team, uh, eating popcorn or having hot dogs on the grill, sort of thing.
No, yeah,
It's not a
very
real life
boomer.
interaction. Uh,
Well, I mean,
I
they're
feel
not
like,
playing it though. I mean, that's the.
yeah, it's just
I
what
mean,
was
I
that
get if
COVID
it's
term?
if it's like a digital consumption thing, then that's that would kind of defeat the point. But I mean, there's other things, I suppose. I mean, I was always really into book groups as well for in real life stuff, but I've had a very difficult time restarting those after COVID, and especially since I moved to a new community, it's very difficult.
Yeah, and people just aren't raised to read books anymore. Uh, I kind of grew up with like a boomer who did read me books before going to bed. Kind of try and encourage me to read more books instead of being on the computer playing games. And for a lot of young people, they don't have that influence at all. That was just absent from their lives. So all they know is the instant dopamine of social media.
I always like
Mm.
that because for parents, it's so much easier to make a commitment to read your kid books than to keep them away from all digital media, because the kids go after, even if they don't have their devices, they go after your device or they go after their friends' devices, and it's just impossible. But you can make damn sure to read them books every night, and they love it. And you can be sure to take them hiking. And so, I don't know. Is that going to crowd out the negative influence of technology? Probably not. But for me as a parent, that's an easier way to think about the problem.
Well, I would say anything that helps kind of give you a grasp of real life interactions and not instant gratification, delayed gratification is immensely helpful in your social development. Uh, and I'm tremendously grateful that I got to experience that at all because a lot of young people just didn't. And I see how that turned out in their lives to their detriment.
Yeah, I know you want to talk about advice to young people,
Yes,
and this is something that I want. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that thesis, and I have made several videos about advice to young people on my channel. I think I call it like culture war and content creation. And I kind of tapered it off a little bit, mainly because the advice I was giving was largely targeted at a world that was pre-COVID. And a lot of the things, just the physics doesn't seem like it works the same way. So I'm not so sure how well my advice would work in that world. And this is something that I think a lot about. I can give general advice if I were 20 again. Obviously, that's the way, and obviously this is not the early 2000s or the mid 2000s. So, I'm not 20, but I could tell you what I wish if I were in my early 20s, what I would do is I would essentially take a barbell strategy and set my mind to obtaining skills that would get me basically some job that would pay money. And then at the same time, I would pursue my passion projects. Now, there are all these sort of things that it's hard to exactly understand what the physics would be, right? Like in the abstract, like if you were a young person, if I was just like sent back in time, like Marty McFly, and I could be an adult brain in a kid's body or, 20-year-old's body, like there'd be a lot of decisions I would make. For instance, I would maybe I would go to college if I were, I got an engineering degree and that made good money, but I probably wouldn't go to grad school. And I probably would have, if I could be an adult brain in a kid's body, I probably would have not gotten my own apartment, because so much money, so much of my initial income is just non-existent because it just got plowed into rent in these incredibly high rent areas where the jobs were. And that's responsible for a lot of young people's debt. And that debt is a huge impact on you later on in life. The obviously the counter argument is a psychological one, which is that a lot of my friends, there were a bunch of my friends who did stay in their parents' house through their 20s. And a lot of them ended up being kind of, pot smoking video game addicts because they never severed the umbilical cord. So, I guess this is something that you kind of have to ask. I don't know if there's one piece of advice to all people, but in your 20s, you're trying to cultivate a position you want to be in your 30s and in your 40s. And it's hard to think about that, but you want to position it so that when change happens, you'll be prepared for it. And the way you do that is cultivating contacts, cultivating skills, and building things, and being flexible. And don't try to earn, unless you're in Harvard or Yale, don't try to earn institutional stars. I think this is something that I needed to hear in the 2000s. I think very few Zoomers need to hear this. I think it's very, very apparent that this is a rigged game. But don't go around just doing busy work so you can get the A++. Don't fail out of school, obviously, but be more focused on things that you're actually producing and things that you can skills that you actually develop on the outside of the institution, and not the institution's numerical score it attaches to you.
Yeah, I feel like that's well said. Really great advice. We're kind of focusing on building things that will actually last and kind of set you up for success in life, instead of kind of holding you back. So for me, I'm in community college at the moment, to avoid debt, and it's working out pretty great.
That's good. That's a good move.
Because a lot of young people are in debt because they chose to do the 4-year university. They believe the mainstream, narrative. Oh, go do this right now. You got to do it right out of high school, and they weren't prepared for it. And also, a lot of I'm just going to say the Zoomers' financial skills and saving is abysmal. So a lot of them are unprepared for how to handle bills, like textbooks and things like this, natural bills, and so they start taking out loans and don't really handle that well. So that's why it's a stereotype for them to be so in debt and not understand even basic financial skills whatsoever because they're not taught it.
Well, but this is actually even that sentiment. That's sort of a very, that's a very millennial sentiment. I don't know how to pay bills. I was never taught it. Well, no one ever taught my parents how to pay bills. They just paid bills. How were you supposed to teach people to do this sort of these very basic life skills and to understand? I guess this is something you picked up classically by being around other adults, not by having a representative of the state teach it to you in a course and give you a grade for it. And I'm very suspicious of these things where it's adulting, it kind of embodies that sentiment where you describe the ordinary process of functioning as an independent being as some kind of profession that you're doing or that's imposed upon you and that you need to be institutionally certified to carry out. And I just don't know. Something strikes me as very wrong with that mentality.
Yeah, it's a very misplaced mentality, and it comes from Gen X and millennial parents, because that's what they were taught. I guess from their boomer parents. I'm not sure exactly where they got it from, but it was just kind of passed down to us. And the do whatever you want, as long as it's a socially acceptable culture, kind of facilitates this as well. Because it says don't take any responsibilities. You can be irresponsible as long as you want. And don't ever try to do any of these higher skilled kind of things because that's not cool. That's what the older generations did, the uncool people. And that mentality still does exist to a large extent.
Yeah, that's the boomer mentality. In the boomer generation, the boomer generation learned the exact wrong lesson. Oh, most of them were able to pull out of the nose dip of the 60s and land a thoroughly bourgeoisie life in their 40s. But the lesson they learned from that, they had kind of survivor bias, because all the people they saw came through the 60s and who were professional, who didn't retreat to the bourgeoisie suburbs, they only saw the people who survived, who were the winners. They didn't see all the drug-addled people who got destroyed by it. And so the lesson they took was, wow, the people who really went for their dreams and who had no concern about property and just lived a feminist lifestyle, those were the guys. That's what you really need to do. And if we could just get everyone to go to college and internalize that message enough, then we would get our children to the next level. They could all be like, Led Zeppelin or whatever. They could all be living the dream. And that's not realistic at all. Not only was that 60s lie of the eternally emancipated individual completely false, the bourgeoisie lifestyle that boomers thought would be always there as sort of a consolation prize just crumbled away. I mean, you look at like the for the boomers, and I don't want to turn this into a boomer bashing session, but the people who didn't end up in the middle class were like, you had to really screw up to not make that hurdle. And in our generation, it's the exact opposite. If you don't jump the hurdles, you don't end up in that lifestyle whatsoever.
I feel like it's also increasingly difficult just to do that, because increasingly you have to go to increasingly the top schools to even have a chance, like to even actually to have property. Like buying a house is a
Yeah. I don't play that game. Don't try to like this hurdle was almost impossible to jump over when I was trying to jump over it. It was raising fast. Just don't think of like I have to get to the top schools to get a house. Just think about what skills you need to do to get a job that will get you with a down payment and then enough to pay off a mortgage. That's your goal. Like that's your victory condition, not getting an institutional Red Star, because that bar is going to raise and raise and raise and raise. And by the time you're at the point you think you need to be at to win, it will be 2 rungs higher, because everyone else will have come and done the exact same thing as you did. So just think about it in terms of skills. Think about it in terms of what you're building and what people want. Go ahead.
Yeah, realize skills that can be actually useful and solve problems in the real world.
I mean, it can be really simple, right? I had a friend who got through college by being, he did freelance tech support for older people in the area. And this was a great job because he was studying computer science. I don't think he even finished the degree. But at the end of college, he had his own business and he had just as much programming experience as I did. And, and he had a ton of old people who were like a professional network for him and it could hook him up for new jobs. That's way more valuable than like a CS degree from a substandard college. I'll be honest with you guys, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't get a CS degree. A CS degree isn't worth nothing. It confers a certain amount of skills. Employers like it, but you're getting that degree so you can get a job. You're not getting that degree to have a degree. And the degree certainly doesn't guarantee you anything. You're spending this time and money and you're making an exchange. And if that exchange doesn't pay you more money than you're paying for it, then that's a bad deal. It's not something you have to do.
No, I feel like there's this immense pressure, especially from the Gen Xers, who were my parents' generation, that you have to go to college in order to be successful at all. Otherwise, you'll end up in the sub-middle class, sub-middle class, which is unthinkable.
Yeah, because this is the 90s, right? Like we destroyed the working class in the 90s, and the way that the boomers and Xers sort of made that all right. And I shouldn't preach, because in the early 2000s, I was a libertarian and I was making all these excuses about outsourcing jobs and all this shit. But the way we made that all right from an ethical point of view is to convince ourselves, the bourgeoisie and the managerial class convince themselves that everyone who didn't have a college degree was just a slack-jawed yokel, was Cletus, and they deserved to be impoverished. And this was sort of a moral comeuppance with them not being with the times. And it didn't matter that they had worked hard their entire lives. It didn't matter that the horrible degree you got from Berkeley in 1985 didn't give you any marketable skills. It was the fact that that was the excuse. They didn't go to college. You deserve to be poor when you don't go to college. And you know that's sort of nuts, because there's a lot of people who go to college and they're going to be poor now.
Yeah, increasingly a lot of the people in my generation who bought into that narrative went to college. Now, granted, they got useless college degrees, which is always a mistake and we're in debt, but still, they got the degree and they're working at Starbucks. They're working at McDonald's or like a call center. So those high access jobs that they were promised didn't materialize, and now they're in debt.
Yeah, it's just absolutely criminal what colleges have done, and banks and colleges have done to younger Americans. Is absolutely criminal. And I mean, I don't know what the solution is. Obviously, like I said, irresponsible uses of debt have been the mainstay of our society for the last 120 years, or perhaps more like 110. But and you know, I'm not really itching to start blowing the whistle when it comes to forgiving college debt. But at some point, we're going to have to stop forgiving debt, and we're going to actually have to go back to a place where people work for a living and don't just continuously invest in the market and get rich automatically, or who don't just ride waves or trends the way that perhaps some generations did. And that's going to have to start with us taking a less loose approach to money. I don't know that there's any way around it.
No, I think that's well said. I don't see another solution. We can't continue this endless debt kind of debt economics, where young people can't even afford housing at all. Even like after they get the 4-year degree or whatever, can't start a family, still in debt. College debt is unpayable, can't be forgiven, so you have to pay it. So they're really shackled down. They can't really kind of sprout in life. It kind of sets them back also from. It's used as an excuse for not having families too, which is a major tragedy, a secondhand effect from this.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, I want to be charitable to both sides here, and I obviously a lot of times the problems with finances and the sexual revolution and the online dating catastrophe are an excuse to not be virtuous or strong. But it's not just in people's imaginations that the dating market has collapsed. The dating market has collapsed, and you know it's something that, you know, as someone even with what I would consider to be a lot of advantages in the dating market area, something that I struggled with for a long time. And that was before the advent of of speed dating apps. So it's only gotten worse. So I can't imagine how it would be like to be somebody who didn't have my advantages and also was dealing with just a market where 80% of the women reject 80% of the men. Again, we can't solve this problem in macrocosm. We have to start thinking about how to solve the problem in microcosm. And I guess this is one reason why I'm a little less forgiving about people who kind of I don't know, try to carry on the progressive sexual ethic inside right wing spaces. I don't think it has much of a home here, to be honest. I think that right wing communities have to start thinking about matchmaking as something that's everyone's responsibility. And I don't know. Again, that's sort of an invitation for Zoomers and alphas to lay down and not actually break their the social bubble. But I think there's a responsibility for millennials to sort of set up people in social environments where marriage is an expectation and where people who are eligible meet each other. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but I see so many unmarried people and I see so many unmarried women, and it's absolutely terrifying because again, like, first of all, I feel sorry for them on a human level. I feel an obligation to them on a religious level. But then I feel this sort of visceral fear of them when I realize, especially with the women, how absolutely destructive they are going to be when they hit 45. And man, I don't want to be in this country where that happens. Or I want to be in some community where we're not feeling the brunt of that force.
Yeah, the sort of I forgot what year is supposed to be, like 2040 or something. Like over half of all women are going to be single by 40 and have no children.
That's just, yeah, that's just, our society is dead. I mean, it probably already is in the way that it existed previously. But how is this possible? You already don't have replacement level birth rates, and you're going to have half of all women be unmarried and childless, possibly in perpetuity. I don't know. It's I don't want to dominate the conversation, but this is something that's
No, I feel like it's deeply important because this is a fundamental question. Like, so how do we actually date to start a family? Is like, what's the healthy way to do this? Because everybody has their own projects, and like you were talking about that dating app, that right wing dating app, and you have some good critiques for that. And I think
I
real
actually
life
met
is the
my wife
better
on a
way to
dating.
go.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I wrote that thread is I met my wife on a dating app, and it was a religious dating app, and I had met a few other people on the dating app that were, I would call them near misses, meaning that we were both highly eligible for each other, and the personalities just weren't aligned. But in a pinch, it wouldn't have been like a disaster if these were good matches you were getting. And again, this is pre-COVID, but it seemed to be that the thing that worked was that everybody in this dating pool was dating for marriage. So the dates succeeded or they failed really quickly, with one exception. And and at the same time, women had their heads screwed on tightly. They weren't being pressured into sex, and at the same time, they were evaluating the guys for marriage. And that meant a different set of criteria were being put down or were being set down, and that was just invaluable. I don't know if there can be a healthy market for dating. There can only be a healthy market for matches. And if you're creating a system that creates dates, I think you're creating a bad system. And that's where my thinking is right now. Originally, speed dating was invented by the Orthodox Jewish community to get their young people married off quickly. And that was one of the two progenitors of the ultimate cancer that is Tinder. The other, I would say, much more poisonous progenitor was obviously the gay community. But something that was actually very, very effective at getting people to match, speed dating, became absolute cancer when it was applied to dating. And that needs to be understood. You can't have people dating in your match pool if you know what I mean.
No, I think I do know what you mean. The unserious, kind of casual relationships, if that. Because again, the situation is so bad that most people my age don't ever go on a successful date. I mean, it's like 80%, like you said. It's probably
Yeah, but
worse than that,
also,
actually.
I mean, there's also, you're at the absolute worst age for dating, because guys, I mean, this is something that I don't know if this is appropriate to discuss on a podcast, but we all guys have their best success when they date women who are like 3 or 4 years younger than them. And the 3 or 4 this stage in your life, those women are not legal for you to date, to put it bluntly. And or they're not legal for you to court. Or I mean, obviously that's not what's illegal, but it's not encouraged, and I wouldn't encourage it because you're probably too young to match off. So I think men at a young age, just they need to have a way to prove themselves that's not revolving around their experiences with women. And there used to be avenues for men to do this, and I don't know if there are anymore, or how we could recreate them.
I feel like there are some people trying to do that, but it's quite small. And like just the visceral oration of male spaces is so total in the mainstream society that many people just don't even think about it anymore. They're very apathetic to this. They kind of accept the social isolation to a large degree. They kind of embrace it. This is kind of why the incel thing is so big. It's not just a joke.
Do people still identify as incels? That seems so weird to me.
Yes, quite a lot of people my age and younger do. Now, again, I don't know if they
like
actually
victim
sincere.
mentality, right? I mean,
well, yes, a lot of them do have a victim mentality. Because again, they see that the system has screwed them over. Everything is the game is rigged. They kind of accept this, and then they become bitter and don't do anything productive with that. And so that's why this is so popular, because it's right. It's an excuse not to do anything, which is easier.
I mean,
than
yeah,
doing
I mean,
anything.
that's exactly what our this generation needs, is more excuses not to do anything. You know, I mean, I don't know. I think purposeful celibacy is so much more powerful. All of the men I know who can't, even some right wing ones, they complain about not getting women, and it blows my mind. I don't know, what are you doing? Even if you were celibate for the rest of your life, you're destroying your own power and your own ability to author your life by constantly making the focus of your life something that you don't have.
Yeah, it seems to be a very short-term mindset. Because again, that's the culture. Is instant gratification. Nothing else matters beyond that. Because who cares anyway? I feel that that's kind of what informs a lot of the young people's decisions. It's just that by itself. It isn't even kind of looking at the cost-benefit analysis of these things. It's just does it provide instant pleasure or not? And if it doesn't, I'm not even going to think about it, regardless of the cost of it personally or the long term.
Well, I mean, if that's going to be your attitude to life, you're going to have to bear it yourself, right? You're already kind of a slave.
Yeah, that's why a lot of young people are slaves. So that brings me to the next question. How should young people have a better relationship with technology? Is Uncle Ted right? Is that the only solution?
Uncle Ted is right. But I don't know. We're not going back to the Bronze Age, obviously. I mean, who knows? I mean, you need some kind of barrier to technology. And I'm not sure what that is. I mean, it's such a large question. I mean, I thought I wrote an article like 2 days ago about technology and my relationship to it. I'm in many ways somebody who's dedicated their life towards technology in his professional capacity. That's sort of one of the main failings of my life, because I think that most of the things that I worked on were destructive ultimately. But there's a craft to technology if you want to pursue that. We have to kind of separate things out here. I mean, if we're speaking to young men who just they're unaware of anything that isn't instant gratification, then I don't know what to say to those people. I guess maybe if I was right next to them, I could try to shake them out of it. But there is no way away from this trap unless you just say, okay, I'm not dedicating my life to instant gratification. I'm going to do things that are hard. And, there's no easy way to do that because no one has proper boundaries set out. I could tell you to not use any social media and I'd be a hypocrite. The only reason why most people know about me is because of social media. I hate Twitter. I like Substack, and I have kind of a middle relationship with YouTube. And that's kind of the deal, I guess, right? That's not really advice for anybody because it depends on the person. And even that's bad advice. I mean, it's like alcohol. Some people can drink and they're just fine, and some people they become alcoholics. And
I feel like it is a very broad question because it depends on the person so much. But I feel like we can all benefit from just like a moderate use of technology, reducing as much as like we can to a healthy level.
The question is how. I mean, the one solution that I've been toying with is just like absolutely limit your technology to like specific windows of time, which is very difficult for me to do. But it's something that I could have absolutely done, at an earlier age. Again, I guess this is sort of assuming that you're not already addicted to it, because doing that as an addict would be much, much harder. If you're an addict, you have to go off at cold turkey before you can reintroduce it in piecemeal. That's my experience.
Okay, that seems to be fairly good.
I think the Prudentialist also released an article about the exact same thing, and I haven't read it in its entirety, but it looks good. And he is much closer to your generation than I am. I have this weird recollection of when the internet was something that coexisted with real life, and it was completely non-destructive before 2009. Like the internet was there, and you would never know it was there. Maybe somebody would be playing a video game on the internet, and then they'd come out and have a dinner party. But your social life was not on the internet. Period. Maybe you would learn about a party or see pictures posted to Facebook afterwards, but your social life was not on the internet. The internet became pathological when it devoured social life. And, unfortunately, we've spent the last 2 years destroying all real world social organizations that are not online. And, I don't know the way back from this. The way back from this is that you just have to dedicate yourself to not doing this. And I don't know, is it social media is not exactly heroin. I do encourage people to cold turkey it if they think they're addicted. But the more important thing to do is to make sure that you're forcing yourself to be social, not forcing yourself not to use the internet. It's much more important that you do things than that you not do things, if you catch my meaning. If you're not using Twitter so you can play more Call of Duty, that's not going to help you.
No, I feel like you bring up a really good point there. A lot of us use the social media also just because it provides that instant gratification. It's kind of an excuse for not doing the real life stuff that we should be doing, and then we wonder why we keep coming back to it because that stuff is absent, or we're having a fundamental need that's not being met, and so it's filled by social media and unhealthy parasocial relationships to a large degree because a lot of us are just too lazy, to be honest, actually. do the real life work necessary to build the groundwork for real life relationships and social bonding to a large degree. Um, I don't know an easy way to fix this. I feel like this is just gonna have to be a personal thing that we all work on. Trying to fix this on a
Well,
societal
yeah, I mean, I
level.
don't know if you can all work. That sentence is kind of weird because you can't collectively work on a personal thing, right? It's a personal thing that I work on, or it's a collective thing that the collective has to work on. But a personal thing that we all have to work on sounds like everyone's waiting on everyone else to save them, if you know what I mean. Which is the classic way to not get saved.
Yeah, waiting on someone else to do something that you should be doing. So I want to get your opinion on Tate. What do you think about the whole drama surrounding his recent event in Romania, being arrested? So,
I mean, it feels like there's always a person. Did people remember Davis O'Reilly? Does that ring a bell for you?
no, I never heard of him before.
Okay, well, there's always they even have the same voice. Davis O'Reilly is certainly not sort of like the operator that Tate was, but he had the same kind of disposition. It seems like every 10 years or so, there's one of these people who pushes themselves forward as the antithesis of the feminist guy. And he gets really, really popular, and then he explodes, and no one hears about him ever again. And that Andrew Tate seems to be the latest iteration of that. And I don't know. I mean, it doesn't work, right? These people kind of they kind of exist to be they're popular because the left hates them, and not because they've done anything else that's very impressive. I know that Andrew Tate had an MMA career, and I'm told that it was fairly impressive, but no one knows him because he had a good MMA bout. They know him because feminists hate him. And that's not, I think that's a very negative. I'm very tired of celebrities that are celebrities because the progressive left hates them. If the progressives did not exist, you would never know who Andrew Tate was. And that's different than somebody, who I think has something to actually say. If you have like a new political theory that happens to talk about progressivism, or if you're a commentator and you do good commentary, and of course you talk about progressives because you do commentary, that's that's a little bit different. But I don't know why I should really be listening to Andrew Tate. And moreover, it feels like a rerun. I feel like I've seen this game before. I mean, it feels like it's just going to be Milo Yiannopoulos over again, or Richard Spencer over again, or Davis O'Reilly over again. And that, I don't know. I mean, these aren't exactly equivalent figures, but they are. It feels very similar somehow.
Well, they probably are related to the same phenomenon. I feel like he's just the latest figure of this kind of movement, and also just because he's blown up because of going on like shows like what's that guy's name again?
Was he on
Former host of Good Morning Britain. That guy, I forgot what his name was.
Piers
Morgan. Yes,
Piers
he's been on
Morgan.
Piers Morgan a couple of times.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that what Andrew Tate to me, what Andrew Tate represents is a generational divide, and it's because people are so starved of somebody who actually is not going in a progressive direction and making a firm break from it, that they'll just take anything. And the counterexample that's provided by your typical boomer or Xer or even millennial conservatives, they're just so weak. They're so weak. And I know that I'm not, in the famous words of the Kings, I'm not the world's most masculine man, right? But relative to some of these characters that come out of the conservative incorporated movement, there's such a lacking. There's such a deficit. And I think that that's what Andrew Tate exploits.
Yeah, there is a massive bulging gap in our culture for somebody who doesn't go along with the insanity that just keeps getting, you know, infinitely progressing, onwards and upwards in a total oblivion sort of way. So even though they're low quality people, it really doesn't matter as long as you'll just won't go along with it. That's just rare for somebody to actually do that. And then we'll all support them because what else is there to do?
Well, not support them, right? Why do you have to support a person just because your enemies put them forward as their enemy?
Because I'll just say that the right has a battered spouse mindset.
Yeah,
because they're so used to being beaten to death for like 100+ years at this point that anyone who stands up, to the person beating them seems like a hero. The greatest hero is going to rescue them. So this is why they cheer on celebrities who say even like for example that drama with I don't know, it was Megan Thee Stallion or one of these other people because she said something counter to the narrative, and then all of a sudden she's a part of the conservative movement, and they all jumped in to embrace her.
Based J.K. Rowling, based what's her the trans Caitlyn Jenner, like all of these. I don't know. I've just seen this it's so tiresome. This is such a I don't know. I think that at least in the early 2000s, it wasn't apparent what the pattern was. But now it's so apparent what the pattern is. And it's painful to watch this just continuously go on and on and on without an end in sight. I mean, I just don't know why people are just not tired of this. They just need to kind of ride this wagon until the wheels come off.
No, I really don't know. So just their mindset, their current social conditions. But so let's have a fun question. Do you think autism is why there are any young Zoomers who are part of the dissonant right? Think autism plays a role in that?
I'm not so sure. I mean, I usually associate autism more with the left than I do with the right. I mean, when I say autism, I mean just sort of like myopia, like you just focus down on one issue and ignore all the other ones, regardless if that's the most important issue. The thing that really turned me into a right winger was sort of asking bigger questions about what's ultimately important, not hyper focusing down on one particular technical question. I guess there are some people who are, they hyper focus on something like HBD or monetary theory or something like that. And I guess in those instances, autism makes you right wing. But in most instances, hyper focusing onto a specialty field does the exact opposite. It's the big picture where the cracks in progressivism, in my opinion, become very, very apparent.
All right, that's interesting. PK brings up. I thought autism was a libertarian thing.
Yeah, libertarianism is very autistic. So is communism. A lot of autistic people got sucked into the whole bread tube communist thing. If you guys want a good laugh and you're a millennial like myself that remember this comic back from when it wasn't just a cringe fest, go look at Existential Comics Twitter feed and you'll laugh your ass off. It's just the most cringe, autistically communist takes imaginable. They're like the thoughts that I would have had when I was 14 years old and thought I was a socialist.
No, that sounds hilarious. To be honest.
Yeah, this person's probably pushing 40, if they're not past 40 already. I can't. It's the sheer amount of arrested development in the society that's just hard to really take stock of.
No, I only bring up the question just because it's such a meme on our side, uh, is that we're all autistic, uh, or that autism plays a role in why you get here on the pipeline.
Well, I mean, the internet makes everyone autistic, or it rewards autism, unfortunately. But my brand is kind of, I mean, maybe my brand is being more schizo than autistic, right? But my perspective is very anti autism, quote unquote, very very anti myopic. I think people need to be kind of big picture people, politically, that is. Either that or actually be a specialist in that thing.
Yeah, I have something valuable to say. Uh,
I
I
mean, you
could
can
tell
you can
from
have something valuable to say as a generalist. I think that this is a lot of times this is sort of a misnomer of our expert-based society, is that if you're not an expert, you have nothing interesting to say. But a lot of people who made breakthroughs in certain sciences were amateurs who walked on. You know, Wittgenstein, one of the most prominent philosophers and mathematicians of the early 20th century, he was a mechanical engineer, I believe.
Oh, I'm glad you caught that. Even I don't escape the propaganda of worshiping the expert class. I believe me, only they can say the truth on any topic. Um,
Yeah, it's tough. I don't
I
know.
could,
I think the most important thing is just kind of maintain a certain amount of curiosity, really.
yeah, I think that's very important. Not to get sucked into whatever these people have to say is authoritative on all things, that subject. I can tell from personal experience, a lot of parents have a figure it out on your own, and many fall into despondency on their parents.
Hmm.
I don't know, do you tend to witness that? That phenomenon?
Despondency of what? I don't know if I really understood what you just said.
I can tell from personal experience, a lot of parents have a figure it out on your own mentality, and many fall into despondency on their
Many
parents.
parents or many children?
I used to talk about children.
Ah, so they have a mentality that you should figure things out. I mean, I think you should figure things out by yourself, to be honest. Uh, I mean, certainly the school system doesn't have a figure it out on yourself mentality. I guess maybe they're just bad actors, but you know, um, I don't know. My kid is a toddler, so I'm not so sure I really have like super insights in how you would manage a child that's asking deeper questions. And a lot of this, I'm probably, if I give you advice right now, I'm going to be eating shit in like 10 years, right? But my impression is that the important thing to do is to sort of ask probing questions to the kid and then supply him with information when he asks you questions. And I guess my hope from a sort of ideological religious point of view is that this sort of tempting atheism, progressive nihilism that kind of captures most people, certainly captured me, doesn't look like it's capturing you in their early 20s. Is this going to kind of burn out, or I'm going to kind of show him the material in advance and then he's going to get kind of inoculated against it or something?
No, sorry, Hunger corrected me. It's dependency, not despondency. Dependency.
Oh, they're dependent. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like they're overly dependent on their parents for ideas. I mean, do people still rebel against their parents? I mean, other than taking gender hormones, isn't that a thing that you kind of clash with your parents ideologically on some topic or another?
I would disagree. I would say even the parents support that because that's what's cool, is to allow your children to become trans or take the hormones or
Well,
be
yeah,
part of the gay
that's.
pride parade.
I mean, I guess this is. I always thought that this is what's always so surprising, because you think that these things can't maintain their cool when they're super institutionalized, but they kind of can. They kind of can. I emphasis on kind of, because you could definitely feel this trans thing kind of creaking a little bit. There was an article by Mary Harrington that came out in Unheard, I think yesterday, about the incel to trans pipeline. I mean, this, I don't know if the LGBT or whatever, the alphabet people know just what kind of apocalypse they're staring down if this thing mainstreams. But if the LGBT community is going to absorb as the greatest victims the lowest status men in our society, they're going to lose their perception of being cool very, very quickly.
Well, let's hope that they do, because what's being cool is self-destructive to the children's lives, and I'm just surprised how popular this trans thing became out of nowhere. How quickly they can just astroturf something into the top of the victim hierarchy.
Well, they didn't really. I mean, they were building this for decades, right?
I guess it just became very evident. Like, it just happened so fast. I didn't really notice that they were building it. I just sort of popped in there into the mainstream conversation. Everything sort of cascades very quickly.
Yeah, and obviously girls go right along with it because this is kind of catnip for the female psychology, this civil rights stuff. And then, this incel to trans pipeline, this could be the other piece. But that's sort of the destructive element of it too, because that will be sort of the seeds of the movement's destruction.
Very well possible. So kind of closing us out, Dave, what do you think are the three most important things that young people should be doing to better their lives and better set themselves up for the future that we hope to have, and the family we hope to raise? What do you think are the three most important things that we can be working on?
I mean, the most important thing as a young person is to kind of maintain a sense of optimism about what and ambition. And I'm not, I'd be giving advice to my older self, my younger self. I made an entire video on that. And I think the number one piece of advice I gave was don't panic. That might not be, the advice that young people these days need to hear. Maybe if they're just so apathetic as you're describing, they need to kick up the rear.
Black-pilled, yes.
Yeah, but the thing is that your number one thing in youth is energy and ambition and a little bit of anger and vivacity. There's no way as like someone who's pushing into their 40s almost now, is going to match that in somebody who's in their 20s. And that's such a utility. That's such a utility that you have when you're younger. And you have to do it as ever as necessary to make sure that you're feeding that fire in yourself, feeding your ambitions, feeding your passions. And that involves a little bit of restraint. It involves principle. And it involves challenging yourself. And that's where sort of this advice becomes highly individualized, because some people are going to find this motivating fire in places that are spiritual. Some people are going to find it in places that are more vocational, I would say, in building things in this world. Some people are going to find it in places that are more artistic. And I can't tell you that where you can find this motivation. I think all of it is ultimately divine in origin. But what I can tell you is that if you're not chasing the sense of life and creation and risk taking, you're not living. And it only gets harder to live when you get out of your life does not end after your 20s. It doesn't end after your 30s. It doesn't end after your 40s or your 50s or your 60s. It starts statistically ending after your 70s, but we won't go into that. But every successive decade, it gets harder to embrace life with the sort of raw energy you did in the decade before, and you have to train yourself to do it. And if you sleep on that, you're making everything harder for yourself. Don't chase your childhood in your 20s. Don't chase your 20s in your 30s, and don't chase your 30s in your 40s. But always chase the energy. And I really do want to caution people against nostalgia. That has been, for my generation, absolute poison. Now, and I'm a person who thinks that the past was definitively better than the present, but it's got to be about bringing the spirit of the past forward to live in the present as an actual thing, not just entombing it in your own memory to relive in a virtual feedback loop. And I don't know. I think that traps a lot of people. And really, at this stage, being somebody who's young, you're trying to not fall into any of these traps. You're trying to stay out of depression. You're trying to kind of be flexible, because who knows what the job market's going to do. And you're trying to get some situation where you can actually be financially independent eventually. And in order to do that, you need to keep yourself motivated to be ambitious and to sort of live life with vitality and spirit and soul. So I don't know. That might be a bit vague, but that's the advice I have.
No, I think that's very well said. Having a motivation to continue life and not be yeast, so to speak, not to be a vicarious bugman who just consumes content all day.
Yeah, exactly. It's so. It's just depressing. I mean, this is people get to their 40s and they're like, well, I always wish that I had hitchhiked across the state. And then you think like, well, yeah, but you're 40. And hitchhiking across the state is something that you could do very easily when you're 20. But your body does not work that way anymore, right? So I know your life isn't over, right? But there are some things that you have to kind of be there for when it's your time. And, we have brief lives. We have what God gives us, right?
Indeed. Taking advantage of what we do have so we don't regret it later, I think, is the biggest thing, right? So a lot of old people regret not doing things.
But don't be consumed by regret. If you wake up in your 50s, and you haven't done anything, you still have a whole life ahead of you, even in your 50s.
Indeed, and the possibilities are size you make them. But as we kind of close out here, is there anything you'd like to kind of show?
I think people know who I am, right? Yeah, I've got a Substack. I got a YouTube channel. I'm going to try to make more essays in the next month, hopefully, with the time I have. But we'll see.
Maybe even the Shrek video, Fable.
Yeah, well,
Shrek video.
See, people don't aware of this, but your videos are a stack. They're not a cube. So first in is last out, as they say. And it's even harder when you've recorded the first half before your child was born, which means that you're not the same person you were when you started the video. But anyway, yeah, we'll see.
All right, everyone, remember, the lie can't last forever. Keep your hopes up.